They told us for decades this story was finished, sealed, untouchable. But tonight, the silence gets shattered. Because one voice just said the part everyone else was too afraid to say out loud. And once those words are spoken, there is no pulling them back. This is the moment where whispers turn into accusations, where street code collapses, and where the most powerful name in hip-hop history gets dragged back into the darkest night the culture has ever known. Because Freddie didn't just hint. He didn't dance around it. He didn't play safe. He broke the code and said what the streets have allegedly known all along, that Tupac Shakur didn't just die in chaos. He was allegedly executed, and the order came from the very top. For years, people were trained to look in one direction while the real story allegedly moved in another. Blame got recycled, documentaries softened edges, and time did what time does best, made people tired of asking questions. But this time, the accusation doesn't come from police paperwork or internet conspiracy forums. It comes from someone speaking with the confidence of street memory, the kind that doesn't need footnotes, the kind that says, if you know, you know. And once Freddie opens his mouth, everything changes.
You personally, after you seen the documentary, do you believe that Diddy has something to do with Tupac murder?
Anybody with common sense, no. Anybody with common sense, no. It's kind of like the John Gotti situations, right? So Gotti kept for so long, we knew who Gotti truly was. The Paul Castellano situation, that's his name, right? You know who took out the boss. Carmichael, I think that's his name, whatever. You know, but you can't prove it. We know of Puffy indiscretions. We knew he killed Tupac. It didn't make sense for nobody else to kill Tupac.
That isn't speculation dressed up as curiosity. That is a direct hit. A claim delivered without hesitation, without apology, and without the fear that usually wraps itself around this subject. Freddie frames it like an open secret, like something so obvious that pretending otherwise feels insulting. He compares it to legendary crime figures who everyone knew were responsible for things they were never convicted of, suggesting that power doesn't erase guilt, it just delays consequences. And just like that, the narrative flips. This isn't about mystery anymore. This is about alleged orchestration. What makes this explosive isn't just the accusation, it's the certainty. Freddie doesn't say people suspected. He says people knew. And once that idea lands, the next question becomes unavoidable. If the streets knew, why didn't the world? The answer, according to Freddie, lives in silence, fear, and a code that punishes anyone who speaks too loudly.
For so many years, so many people try to spin the narrative and was saying it was Suge, but if you was in the streets, you knew it wasn't Suge. Because if you in the streets, you're gonna know somebody that knows somebody from that side who's reputable, whose word that you can trust and honor. They gonna spread the word.
This is where the long-standing scapegoat narrative gets torn apart. For decades, Suge Knight's name absorbed the blame, becoming the convenient villain in a story that needed closure. Freddie calls that spin exactly what it was, a distraction. According to him, real information doesn't move through press conferences, it moves through trusted voices, quietly, efficiently, and without paperwork. The implication is chilling. The truth didn't disappear. It circulated underground, protected by fear and reinforced by power. Freddie then does something even more dangerous. He humanizes the man who was blamed.
It wasn't Suge because of what we heard Suge went through after. If you know, you know. Like, if you don't, you don't. So Suge basically was affected by the Tupac shit real bad. You get what I'm saying? He loved him like a brother. And I don't really think Suge probably loved nobody else like he loved Tupac.
This reframing is explosive because it rewrites emotional history. Instead of a cold-blooded mastermind, Freddie paints Suge as someone devastated, someone who didn't just lose an artist but lost family. Whether people agree or not, the impact is massive, because if Suge wasn't the one, then the question becomes unavoidable again. Who benefited? And in gossip narratives, benefit is everything. Freddie doesn't pretend this information came from nowhere. He grounds it in street context, emphasizing that this wasn't a theory built in hindsight. It was something allegedly shared in real time, person to person, long before social media ever amplified rumors.
And I'm gonna keep it real. That's the way it was brought back to me, from street inside a car in LA.
That single line carries weight because it implies proximity, not YouTube comments, not documentaries released decades later. A car. Los Angeles. The aftermath's still warm, and with that, the story stops feeling historical and starts feeling immediate again. Then Freddie shifts gears and introduces the part of the story that makes people uncomfortable: the money. Because in hip-hop's darkest legends, violence doesn't move without currency trailing behind it.
Had to turn it up and single it out, and you heard it. I put $1 million on your fucking head.
That line detonates like a bomb. $1 million isn't symbolic, it's specific. It suggests intent, planning, and follow through. Whether metaphorical or literal, Freddie treats it as a breadcrumb, something hidden in plain sight, something people ignored because they didn't want to believe it could be that blatant. In gossip logic, this becomes the alleged receipt, the moment where bravado and confession blur. And then comes the explanation for the question everyone has whispered for decades. If this is true, why did nobody go down for it?
Was the money that keep it. Only reason Puffy is not locked up is because Von Zip stole the money, which at the time seemed like a creepy thing, but came back to save Puffy's fucking life because the motherfucker he was willing to pay turned out to be a rat years later.
Here, Freddie offers an answer that feels almost cinematic. Money moved, money disappeared, and the collapse of one plan allegedly saved another man's freedom. It's the kind of story that makes people believe in luck, fate, or karma depending on which side they're standing on. The implication is brutal. Justice didn't fail because it didn't try. Justice failed because the system never caught up to the truth. Freddie doesn't stop at accusations. He turns philosophical, almost prophetic, warning that time doesn't erase wrongdoing, it just waits. This is where the story shifts from exposure to omen. The idea that unresolved violence carries weight, that it lingers, that it waits. Freddie frames the present moment as part of a reckoning, suggesting that current chaos surrounding powerful figures isn't random, it's overdue. In gossip storytelling, this becomes the drumbeat. The past isn't buried, it's circling. And just when it seems like the narrative has reached its peak, Freddie introduces the wild card, the man who thrives on pressure, conflict, and public warfare. That's not a tease. That's a threat wrapped in patience. According to Freddie, this isn't just about history. It's about leverage, secrets stored, receipts held, and a waiting game that hasn't reached its final round. If true, it suggests that what's already public might only be the surface, and that escalation isn't hypothetical, it's strategic. By the time Freddie finishes speaking, the story is no longer about one night in Las Vegas. It becomes a layered narrative of power, silence, money, fear, and delayed consequences. Whether people believe every word or not, the impact is undeniable, the code was broken, the accusation was spoken, and once that happens, the conversation can never return to what it was before. This isn't closure, this is ignition. The moment Freddie finished speaking, the internet didn't just react, it fractured. Old interviews resurfaced, forgotten quotes got replayed, and suddenly a story people were told to stop revisiting came roaring back with teeth. Because this wasn't some random conspiracy blogger chasing clicks. This was someone speaking with the calm certainty of a man who believes the statute of limitations doesn't apply to truth. And when truth is framed as something buried, not disproven, curiosity turns into obsession. What makes Freddie's claims so dangerous is not just what he says, but when he says it. This isn't the early 2000s when control over media meant control over narrative. This is a moment where documentaries, social clips, and long-forgotten confessions can be stitched together in real time. And Freddie knows that. He leans into it, almost daring the past to defend itself. That's where the documentary angle comes in. Critics rush to dismiss the renewed focus on Tupac's murder as recycled material, claiming nothing new was revealed. Freddie rejects that argument outright. According to him, repetition isn't weakness, it's amplification. The truth doesn't change just because people ignored it the first time. He points out something most casual viewers missed. The man who admitted involvement in Tupac's murder has already spoken publicly, repeatedly. Names were already said. Details were already out. The only thing missing was reach. And once that reach expanded, the silence became impossible to maintain. Freddie frames this as a cultural failure more than a legal one. People weren't uninformed, they were uninterested. The story was there, but it wasn't packaged for mass consumption. And once it was, suddenly everyone had an opinion, especially those accusing others of snitching. That accusation, Freddie makes clear, is laughable. From his perspective, you can't snitch on a story that's already public record. You can't betray a code that was already broken years ago. And you definitely can't silence someone by pretending the information doesn't exist when it's been circulating quietly for decades. Freddie positions the backlash against 50 Cent as performative outrage, people angry not because the story is false, but because it's loud again. And that's where the tension between Diddy Diddy and 50 Cent become central to the narrative. Freddie doesn't paint their conflict as random beef or entertainment industry theatrics. He frames it as a Cold War built on leverage, mutually assured destruction. Two powerful figures allegedly holding information that could dismantle reputations if released at the wrong moment. According to Freddie, this is why the situation feels stalled, because both sides are waiting to see who flinches first, waiting to see who speaks too much, waiting to see who underestimates the other. Freddie's description of this standoff is chilling because it suggests restraint, not chaos. He implies that what's happening publicly is controlled pressure, not loss of control. The calm before something far louder. And in gossip logic, silence between enemies is never peace, it's calculation. As the conversation deepens, Freddie widens the lens beyond individuals and places responsibility on the industry itself. He talks about how young men were misled into believing violence was currency, that power came from fear, and that loyalty meant silence even when silence destroyed lives. In this framing, Tupac's death becomes more than a murder. It becomes a symbol of how narratives were manipulated to protect those at the top while everyone else absorbed the damage. Freddie's tone shifts here. It's no longer just accusatory, it's reflective, almost regretful. He speaks about the cost of that lifestyle, the paranoia, the constant expectation of consequences catching up. He contrasts it with a simpler life, peace, privacy, normalcy, and then subtly reminds the audience that none of that insulation exists for celebrities living under constant scrutiny. That's when he circles back to Diddy, not as an untouchable mogul, but as a man currently under pressure. Freddie doesn't claim every allegation flying around today is connected to Tupac's death, but he strongly implies a pattern of things surfacing when they're no longer containable, a pattern of the past demanding attention when it's ignored too long. He frames the present as a reckoning, not revenge. And that word, reckoning, matters, because a reckoning isn't about punishment handed down by courts alone. It's about exposure, about legacy being rewritten in real time, about power losing its ability to redirect blame. Freddie suggests that when someone reaches a certain height, the fall doesn't come from enemies, it comes from gravity, from accumulated weight, from too many stories pressing upward at once. That's why he keeps repeating the idea that souls don't rest, not in a supernatural sense, but in a cultural one. Unresolved violence lingers in music, in memory, in the questions people refuse to stop asking. And Tupac, as a figure larger than life, refuses to fade quietly. Every generation rediscovers him. Every generation reopens the wound. And every time that happens, the people connected to that night get pulled back into the conversation, whether they want to be or not. Freddie also dismantles the argument that time should end discussion. He points out that delayed accountability doesn't equal innocence. History is full of figures who lived freely for decades before consequences arrived unexpectedly, sometimes through courts, sometimes through public opinion, sometimes through the slow erosion of credibility. And that's the threat embedded in his words. Not arrest, not conviction, exposure, loss of control over narrative. Freddie makes it clear that he isn't positioning himself as a hero or a savior. He's not claiming to solve the case. What he's doing is removing the comfort of denial. He's forcing people to confront the idea that the story they accepted might have been convenient, not correct. By the end of his commentary, the atmosphere around the Tupac case feels different. He doesn't close with finality. He closes with tension, with the sense that this chapter is being reopened not because someone wants it reopened, but because it can't stay closed anymore. And hovering over all of it is the unresolved standoff between Diddy and 50 Cent. Freddie frames it as unfinished business, as something waiting for the right trigger. He doesn't predict who will speak next. He just makes one thing clear. When people hold information long enough, it either leaks or it explodes. This story, according to Freddie, is far from done. The code has already been broken. The accusation has already been said. And once that happens, the only question left is not if more comes out, but when. Because in hip-hop, legends don't die quietly, and secrets don't stay buried forever.